I'm Sarah, and at 28, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. That illusion shattered on my birthday when I discovered my parents had secretly boarded a luxury yacht in the Caribbean with my sister Emma, celebrating what they called her life achievement, while I sat alone with a store-bought cake. The photo Emma posted showed them toasting champagne at sunset, completely forgetting the daughter they'd raised to believe family loyalty meant everything. What I told them next would expose decades of favoritism and trigger a chain reaction that would ultimately destroy the very foundation they'd built their precious family image upon. Before we dive into how this family betrayal unraveled everything, I'm curious, where are you watching from today? Have you ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family? If this story hits close to home, smash that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will show you exactly how karma works when family loyalty becomes a one-way street. Trust me, you won't want to miss the moment everything comes full circle. Growing up, Emma was 3 years younger, but somehow always seemed to eclipse everything I achieved. While I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout high school, working part-time jobs to save for college, Emma barely scraped by with C's, but somehow convinced our parents that her creative spirit was more valuable than academic excellence. When I graduated valedictorian, the dinner conversation centered around Emma's latest art project. When I got my first job at a prestigious marketing firm, they threw a bigger celebration for Emma getting accepted to community college. The pattern continued into our 20s. I climbed the corporate ladder, bought my own apartment, and maintained financial independence while Emma drifted between different passion projects, none of which ever materialized into actual careers. She tried photography for 6 months, then switched to jewelry making, followed by a brief stint attempting to become a yoga instructor. Each new venture was funded by our parents, who praised her for following her dreams while subtly criticizing my materialistic focus on career success. What stung the most wasn't just the financial support they lavished on Emma, it was the emotional investment. Mom would spend hours listening to Emma's problems, offering comfort and advice about her latest relationship drama or creative block. When I mentioned stress from work or dating struggles, I'd get a 5-minute conversation before the topic somehow shifted back to Emma's needs. Dad, who rarely showed physical affection, would hug Emma goodbye after every family dinner while giving me a perfunctory wave. The favoritism became so normalized that I started questioning my own perceptions. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe Emma just needed more support because she was the artistic one. I told myself that being the responsible older sister meant accepting less attention, that my independence should be its own reward. But deep down, the resentment grew with every milestone they minimized, every achievement they overlooked, every time they chose her needs over mine. Last Christmas perfectly encapsulated our family dynamics. Emma announced she wanted to take a sailing course to find herself on the open water. Within a week, our parents had not only paid for her lessons, but surprised her with a Caribbean sailing vacation as an early birthday present. When I mentioned I'd been saving for months to take them on a wine tour in Napa for their anniversary, Dad actually laughed and said, "Sarah, you know we're not wine people. Besides, Emma's adventure sounds much more exciting." That's when I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't just the less favored daughter. I was essentially invisible unless they needed something from me. I was the reliable one they called when they needed help with technology, the responsible one who remembered to send birthday cards to distant relatives, the successful one they bragged about to neighbors while simultaneously dismissing my accomplishments at home. Emma was their pride and joy, I was their convenient afterthought. The sailing trip became Emma's latest obsession. For months leading up to my birthday, every family conversation revolved around her upcoming adventure. She'd learned to tie nautical knots, studied weather patterns, and filled her Instagram with sailing quotes and sunset photos from practice sessions. Our parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions about wind speeds and navigation techniques as if she were preparing to compete in the America's Cup rather than taking a beginner's pleasure cruise. Meanwhile, I'd been dropping hints about my birthday for weeks. It was a milestone year for me, not just turning 28, but also marking my 5th anniversary at the company and my recent promotion to senior marketing director. I'd imagined a nice family dinner, maybe at that new restaurant downtown I'd been wanting to try. Nothing extravagant, just acknowledgement that their eldest daughter had achieved something worth celebrating. But as my birthday approached, the family group chat was filled with Emma's packing updates and sailing weather reports. When I finally asked directly about birthday plans, Mom responded with a distracted, "Oh honey, we'll figure something out when we get back from Emma's trip." The casual dismissal felt like a physical blow. They weren't just forgetting my birthday, they were actively choosing to be absent for it, prioritizing Emma's recreational sailing adventure over their other daughter's special day. My birthday morning started like any other Tuesday. I'd taken the day off work, hoping against hope that my family had planned some kind of surprise. Maybe they'd show up at my apartment with flowers and breakfast, or perhaps they'd arranged a celebration for the evening after returning from what I assumed was a day's sailing trip with Emma. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment and getting ready, maintaining a stubborn optimism that they wouldn't actually abandon me on my birthday. By noon, the silence was deafening. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits. I tried calling Mom first, straight to voicemail. Dad's phone did the same. Even Emma wasn't answering, which seemed odd since she usually responded to messages within minutes, especially when they involved family drama. I told myself they were probably busy with sailing preparations and would call later. As the afternoon wore on, my optimism cracked. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and tried to convince myself that a quiet birthday wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I'd celebrate with friends over the weekend, maybe throw a small party the following week when my family returned. But the loneliness felt suffocating in my empty apartment, surrounded by the birthday cards I'd bought for myself and the small cake I'd picked up from the grocery store. That's when I made the mistake of checking social media. Emma's Instagram story appeared at the top of my feed, and the first image stopped my breath. It was a selfie of her, Mom, and Dad on what was clearly a luxury yacht, with turquoise water stretching endlessly behind them. Emma was wearing a designer bikini I'd never seen before. Mom had a tropical drink in her hand, and Dad was sporting a captain's hat with a genuinely happy smile, the kind of expression I rarely saw him wear around me. The caption read, "Day 3 of our Caribbean adventure. Still can't believe Mom and Dad surprised me with this incredible sailing vacation. Living my absolute best life with my favorite people. Sailboat water wave sun, hashtag blessed daughter, hashtag Caribbean dreams, hashtag family time, hashtag sailing life." Day 3. They'd been gone for 3 days without telling me. This wasn't a day trip or even a weekend getaway. This was a full vacation, carefully planned and executed while deliberately excluding me. I scrolled through her previous posts with trembling hands, finding photos from their departure, pictures of them boarding the yacht, videos of Emma learning to trim the sails while her parents cheered her on. The comments were even worse. Family, friends, and relatives were gushing about how wonderful the trip looked, how lucky Emma was to have such supportive parents, how beautiful the family photos were. Aunt Linda had written, "What an amazing family adventure. You all look so happy." Cousin Mike commented, "Goals. Wish my parents would take me sailing in paradise." Not a single person had mentioned my birthday. Not one comment asked where I was or why I wasn't included in this family vacation. Either they didn't realize it was my birthday, or they simply didn't care that I'd been left behind. Both possibilities felt equally devastating. I called Mom again, and this time she answered on the 4th ring. I could hear wind and water in the background, along with Emma's laughter and Dad's voice giving sailing instructions. "Oh, Sarah. Happy birthday, honey. I'm so sorry we couldn't be there, but Emma's been planning this sailing adventure for months, and the timing just worked out this way. We'll celebrate when we get back, I promise." The casual tone in her voice, as if missing your daughter's birthday was just a minor scheduling conflict, made my stomach drop. Mom, you've been gone for 3 days. This isn't just bad timing. You planned a family vacation without me and didn't even tell me you were leaving. Well, sweetie, it's really Emma's trip. She's been working so hard on her sailing skills, and this was meant to be her special adventure. You understand how important this is for her personal growth, right? Besides, you're so busy with work, we didn't think you'd want to take time off for something like this. The gaslighting was breathtaking. They'd rewritten history in real time, turning their deliberate exclusion into my choice, their favoritism into my busy schedule. It's my birthday, Mom. My 28th birthday. And you chose to be on a yacht in the Caribbean instead of with me. Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. Birthdays happen every year. This sailing opportunity was once in a lifetime for Emma. Surely you can understand that family means supporting each other's dreams. That's when I heard Emma's voice in the background. Tell her we'll bring her back a seashell, followed by laughter from all three of them. They were laughing about my abandonment while floating in paradise, treating my pain like a minor inconvenience to their perfect family vacation. I hung up and immediately called my best friend Jessica, sobbing as I explained what had happened. Sarah, she said after a long pause, this isn't just about your birthday. This is about 28 years of you accepting scraps while they give Emma everything. When are you going to stop letting them treat you like you don't matter? She was right. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was the final, undeniable proof of what I'd been trying to ignore for years. I wasn't just the less favored daughter. I was completely expendable to them. They could plan elaborate vacations, make major family decisions, and celebrate life milestones without even considering my existence. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with my grocery store birthday cake, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to accept their apology when they returned. I wasn't going to pretend this was just a misunderstanding or that my feelings were an overreaction. For the first time in my life, I was going to show them exactly what it felt like to be excluded from family. I started by documenting everything. Screenshots of Emma's Instagram posts showing their elaborate vacation while I spent my birthday alone. I saved the voicemail Mom had left earlier, where she'd casually mentioned they'd be out of town for my birthday without specifying they'd be living it up in the Caribbean. I compiled years of text messages, emails, and photos that showed the stark difference in how they treated Emma versus me. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. Emma's college graduation, elaborate party with 60 guests, professional photographer, custom cake. My college graduation, dinner at Applebee's with immediate family only. Emma's 20th birthday, surprise weekend trip to Napa Valley. My 20th birthday, dinner at home with leftover Chinese food because Emma had a crisis that needed immediate attention. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed them to understand the real consequences of their choices, not just offer hollow apologies and empty promises to do better next time. I'd heard those promises before, usually followed by them reverting to their old patterns within weeks. I started with their social circle. My parents prided themselves on being seen as the perfect family, successful, close-knit, supportive of their daughter's dreams. Dad frequently gave speeches at his Rotary Club about the importance of family values. Mom volunteered with a local organization that supported young women in business, often mentioning how proud she was of her daughter's accomplishments. Their entire social identity was built around being exemplary parents. What would happen if their community knew the truth about how they actually treated one of their daughters? I crafted a social media post that was factual, measured, and devastating, spending my 28th birthday alone while my parents are on a luxury Caribbean sailing vacation with my sister. They left 3 days ago without telling me and only remembered it was my birthday when I called them. I've spent years accepting that I'm not the priority in this family, but being completely forgotten on your birthday really puts things in perspective. Sometimes you have to stop expecting people to care just because they're supposed to. I tagged them in it and set it to public, ensuring their friends, colleagues, and extended family would see it. Within an hour, the comments started rolling in. Shocked relatives, concerned family friends, and confused neighbors all expressing disbelief that such a close family could have such a breakdown in communication. But that was just the beginning. I knew they'd try to control the narrative when they returned, painting me as dramatic or oversensitive. I needed something more permanent, more undeniable. I remembered that Dad's company newsletter had recently featured an article about their employees' family values, with a photo of our parents and a quote about how raising two successful daughters was his greatest achievement. The hypocrisy was stunning. Here was a man being praised for his family values while currently ignoring one daughter's birthday to favor the other. I wrote a detailed email to his company's HR department, not to get him in trouble, but to provide context for any future family-related publicity. I explained that while I appreciated their recognition of his parenting, the reality was somewhat different than the image they'd promoted. I included dates, examples, and the current situation as evidence of a pattern of discriminatory treatment within their model family. For Mom's volunteer organization, I crafted a similar approach. She'd recently been featured in their newsletter discussing the importance of supporting young women's self-esteem and professional development. The irony was almost laughable. She was being celebrated for empowering other people's daughters while systematically undermining her own. I sent them copies of Emma's Instagram posts alongside screenshots of my unanswered birthday texts, with a note explaining that I thought they should know what kind of family dynamics their spokesperson actually promoted at home. I wasn't trying to destroy Mom's volunteer work, but I wanted them to understand that her public persona didn't match her private behavior. The most powerful move, however, was reaching out to Emma directly. Not through angry texts or emotional confrontations, but through a calm, detailed letter that laid out exactly what their family dynamics had done to our relationship. I explained how her constant need for attention and support had been enabled by our parents' favoritism, and how this pattern had prevented us from ever developing a genuine sisterly bond. I told her about all the times I'd celebrated her achievements while feeling invisible in my own family. I described the loneliness of being the responsible daughter who was expected to succeed without support while watching her receive endless encouragement for mediocre efforts. I explained that her Caribbean vacation wasn't just a fun trip. It was the final proof that I would never matter as much as she did to our parents. But I also told her something she probably didn't expect. I forgave her. She'd been raised to believe she deserved more attention, more support, more celebration than anyone else. She'd never been taught to consider how her privilege affected others, because our parents had created a system where her needs always came first. The real architects of this dysfunction were the adults who should have known better. The response was swift and nuclear. Within hours of my social media post going live, my phone was exploding with calls and messages. Extended family members who'd been kept in the dark about the true family dynamics were reaching out with shock and support. Aunt Linda, who'd innocently commented on Emma's sailing photos, called in tears apologizing for not realizing it was my birthday. "Sarah, honey, I had no idea they'd left you alone on your birthday." That Instagram post made it look like such a happy family vacation. I never would have guessed you weren't included. This is just... I don't even have words for how wrong this is. Cousin Mike, who'd enviously commented about wanting parents who'd take him sailing in paradise, sent a long text message expressing his disbelief. "I always thought your parents were relationship goals with how they supported Emma's dreams. I never realized they were basically ignoring your achievements. Looking back at family gatherings, I can see it now. You were always the one helping in the kitchen while Emma held court in the living room. I'm so sorry we didn't notice." But the real earthquake started when Dad's colleagues began seeing my post. His company had recently promoted him to regional manager, partly based on his reputation as a family man with strong values. Suddenly, people were questioning how someone who abandoned his daughter on her birthday could be trusted to lead a team that valued work-life balance and employee well-being. I received a LinkedIn message from one of his coworkers. "Hi, Sarah. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I saw your post about your birthday and wanted to reach out. Your dad talks about you and Emma all the time at work, always emphasizing how proud he is of both his daughters. I'm shocked to learn about what actually happened. Is there anything we can do to help? The message was well-intentioned, but devastating in its implications. Dad had been maintaining his perfect father image at work while systematically neglecting me at home. His professional reputation was built on a lie, and now his colleagues were starting to see the cracks. Mom's situation was even more complicated. Her volunteer organization had built their recent fundraising campaign around stories of strong family support for young women's success. They'd featured her prominently in their materials, using her as an example of how positive family dynamics could empower daughters to achieve their goals. Now they were discovering that their poster mom had abandoned one daughter's birthday to celebrate the other daughter's recreational sailing trip. The organization's director called me personally, expressing concern about the disconnect between mom's public advocacy and private behavior. Sarah, I want you to know that what happened to you goes against everything we stand for. We believe in supporting all young women, not just the ones who happen to fit a particular mold. Your mother's treatment of you is completely inconsistent with the values she claims to represent in our organization. They were reconsidering Mom's role as a spokesperson, which would be devastating to her social standing in the community. She'd built her entire post-career identity around being a champion for young women, and now that image was crumbling under the weight of her own hypocrisy. But the most unexpected response came from Emma herself. Instead of the defensive anger or dismissive attitude I'd anticipated, she sent me a voice message while still on the yacht. I could hear the wind and water in the background, but her voice was shaky and uncertain. Sarah, I just saw your post and read your letter. I'm sitting here on this boat that cost more than most people make in a year, and I'm realizing that I never questioned why you weren't invited. I just accepted that this was my trip, my special adventure, without ever thinking about how it would feel to be left out. And on your birthday. God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. She paused, and I could hear voices in the background, our parents asking her what was wrong. I always knew I got more attention, more support, more everything. But I told myself it was because I needed it more, because you were so successful and independent. I never stopped to think that maybe you needed support too, just different kinds of support. And I never considered that watching me get everything while you got scraps might actually hurt. The voice message continued for several more minutes, with Emma acknowledging years of favoritism she'd previously ignored or justified. She admitted that she'd often played up her struggles and dramatic moments because she knew it would get our parents' attention. She'd learned that being helpless and needy was rewarded in our family, while being capable and independent was taken for granted. I'm going to talk to Mom and Dad today. This isn't right, Sarah. I don't want to be the golden child anymore if it means you have to be invisible. I want us to be real sisters, not competitors in some twisted game where love is a limited resource. Her message was genuine and heartfelt, but it also revealed how deep the damage went. Even Emma, the supposed beneficiary of our parents' favoritism, was starting to realize that their dysfunction had hurt her too. She'd been raised to believe she was entitled to constant support and attention, which had prevented her from developing real resilience and independence. Meanwhile, the Caribbean yacht that was supposed to be Emma's perfect adventure was becoming a floating nightmare for our parents. They couldn't escape the flood of calls, messages, and social media notifications demanding explanations for their behavior. Extended family members who'd previously admired their parenting were now questioning years of decisions and observations. That night, Mom called me from the yacht in a panic. The wind noise in the background made her voice sound distant and desperate. Sarah, honey, you have to take down that post. People are taking this completely out of context. You're making us look like horrible parents over what was just a scheduling conflict. How do you think this dramatic confrontation will end? The tension is building, and the consequences are far from over. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to call out family favoritism. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way things will ever change. Don't forget to like this video if the story is hitting close to home, and subscribe because the resolution to this family drama is going to shock you. A scheduling conflict. I repeated into the phone, my voice deadly calm. Mom, you planned a luxury vacation without me and left me alone on my birthday. That's not scheduling, that's choosing. The background noise on their end had changed. Instead of the festive sounds of sailing and laughter I'd heard in Emma's Instagram stories, I could hear tense voices and what sounded like an argument. Emma's voice was raised, and Dad was using his stern tone that usually ended family discussions. Sarah, you need to understand the position you've put us in, Mom continued, her voice strained. Your father's boss called him today asking about your social media post. My organization is questioning my involvement in their upcoming campaign. You're destroying our reputations over a birthday celebration. The audacity was breathtaking. They were more concerned about their public image than the fact that they'd abandoned their daughter. My reputation is what, Mom? The invisible daughter who accepts scraps? The reliable one who never complains when she's forgotten? Maybe it's time people knew who you really are behind the perfect family facade. That's not fair, and you know it. We love you just as much as Emma. We've always supported your career. We're proud of your success, Dash. When? I interrupted. When have you supported my career? You missed my college graduation dinner because Emma had a panic attack about a boy. You skipped my promotion celebration because Emma needed help moving into her third apartment this year. You've never once prioritized my achievements over her crises. I could hear Dad's voice getting louder in the background, and Emma saying something about coming home early. The paradise vacation they'd prioritized over my birthday was turning into a disaster, and I felt a dark satisfaction knowing their perfect family trip was crumbling. Your father wants to speak to you, Mom said after a moment. Dad's voice came through the line, tight with barely controlled anger. Sarah Elizabeth, you are embarrassing this family with your public tantrum. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this vindictive behavior stops now. You will delete that post, apologize to your mother and sister, and we'll discuss your attitude when we return home. His authoritative tone might have worked when I was 16, but I was a 28-year-old woman who'd just realized she had nothing left to lose. No, Dad. I won't delete anything, I won't apologize for telling the truth, and I definitely won't be discussing my attitude like I'm a child being disciplined for speaking up about being neglected. You weren't neglected. You're being dramatic about a simple misunderstanding, Dash. Dad, you're on a yacht in the Caribbean that costs more than my annual salary, celebrating Emma's hobby while your other daughter spent her birthday alone with a grocery store cake. If that's not neglect, what would you call it? There was a long pause, and I could hear Emma's voice again, more insistent this time. Then Dad came back on the line, his tone slightly less confrontational. Emma wants us to come home early. She says this trip doesn't feel right knowing you're upset. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old Sarah, the one who would have immediately reassured them, told Emma not to ruin her special trip, insisted that everything was fine. But that Sarah had been slowly dying for years, suffocated by the need to be the easy daughter, the one who never caused problems. That's Emma's choice to make, I said instead. But don't come home for me. Don't come home because you're finally realizing that your public reputation is being damaged by the truth about how you treat your children. Sarah, please. Mom's voice was back on the line, and she was crying now. You're tearing this family apart. We can fix this, but you have to meet us halfway. Take down the post, and we'll plan a special celebration for your birthday when we get back. Anything you want, that nice restaurant you mentioned, maybe a weekend getaway, just the four of us. It was the same pattern they'd used for years. Offer grand gestures after the damage was done, temporary attention to smooth over the latest hurt, promises of change that would last exactly until Emma's next crisis required their focus. But this time felt different because the consequences were public and permanent. You know what I want, Mom? I want you to read my letter to Emma. Really read it, not just skim it looking for ways to dismiss my feelings. I want you to look at the documentation I've compiled, years of messages, photos, and examples showing how differently you treat your daughters. I want you to acknowledge that this isn't about one birthday or one trip. This is about 28 years of making me feel like I don't matter as much as Emma. I could hear her crying harder now, and part of me wanted to comfort her, to take back my words and return to our familiar dysfunction. But I remembered Jessica's words from the night before. You've been setting yourself on fire to keep them warm for years. Maybe it's time to let them feel the cold. And Mom, I want you to explain to your volunteer organization how you can advocate for supporting young women while systematically undermining your own daughter's self-worth. I want Dad to tell his colleagues how family values work when one child gets Caribbean vacations while the other child gets forgotten birthdays. The call ended abruptly, and I realized they'd hung up on me. For the first time in my life, I'd refused to back down, refused to minimize my own pain for their comfort, and they couldn't handle it. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with text messages from Emma. Unlike her thoughtful voice message from earlier, these were rapid-fire and emotional. Sarah, Mom is crying so hard she can't eat dinner. Dad is furious and talking about cutting the trip short. I feel terrible about everything. Please call me. We need to fix this. Then, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. But Mom and Dad are really struggling with this. Can't we work it out privately instead of airing everything on social media? And finally, I'm scared our family is going to fall apart. I never wanted that. I just wanted to go sailing. Her messages revealed the fundamental problem with our family dynamic. Emma had been so protected from consequences that she genuinely believed her actions existed in a vacuum. She could accept a luxury vacation while her sister was forgotten, then expect that sister to quietly manage the emotional fallout to preserve family harmony. I typed back a single response: Emma, families don't fall apart because someone tells the truth. They fall apart because the truth was hidden for too long. I'm not responsible for fixing relationships that were broken long before I found the courage to talk about it. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not because the situation was resolved, it was far from over, but because for the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen my own well-being over their comfort. The little girl who'd learned to be grateful for scraps was finally gone, and the woman who remained was done accepting less than she deserved. The next morning brought a deluge of responses I hadn't anticipated. My social media post had been shared dozens of times by family members and family friends, each share adding new layers of commentary and support that I'd never expected to receive. People were coming out of the woodwork to share their own stories of family favoritism and to express shock at learning about my parents' behavior. My grandmother, Mom's mother, called me at 7 a.m. At 82, she'd never been one to mince words, and she was absolutely furious. Sarah, honey, I just heard about what your parents did to you on your birthday. I've been watching this favoritism nonsense for years, and I kept my mouth shut because I thought maybe I was seeing things wrong. But abandoning you on your birthday for that spoiled little princess? That's the last straw. She went on to tell me that she'd already called my mother and given her a piece of her mind. I told her that I raised her better than this, and that if she doesn't get her priorities straight, she's going to lose one of her daughters permanently. You know what she said to me? She said you were being overly dramatic about a simple scheduling conflict. I about hung up on her right then and there. Grandma revealed that she'd been setting aside money for years to leave equally to both Emma and me in her will, but she was now reconsidering that decision. I'm not going to reward Emma's entitlement and your parents' favoritism with my inheritance. That girl has gotten enough handouts from this family. The call was both validating and heartbreaking. If my elderly grandmother could see the dysfunction clearly, why had it taken me so long to acknowledge it? Why had I spent years making excuses for behavior that was obvious to everyone else? More family members reached out throughout the day. Uncle Tom, Dad's brother, sent a long email explaining that he'd always noticed the different treatment but assumed it wasn't his place to interfere. He apologized for his silence and offered his support. Several cousins shared their own observations about family gatherings where I'd been overlooked or dismissed while Emma commanded attention. But the most unexpected response came from my high school friend Rachel, who I hadn't spoken to in years. She sent me a private message that stopped me cold. "Sarah, I saw your post about your family, and I had to reach out. I never said anything back then because I didn't think it was my place, but your parents' favoritism toward Emma was obvious even in high school. I remember your graduation party where Emma threw that tantrum about her ex-boyfriend, and your parents spent the entire evening comforting her instead of celebrating your valedictorian achievement. We all noticed, and we all felt terrible for you." She continued, "I also remember when you got that scholarship to your dream college, and Emma announced her engagement to that loser boyfriend the same day. Guess which news your parents talked about all night at the family barbecue? It wasn't your full-ride scholarship. I've thought about that night for years, wondering how you managed to smile through it all." These revelations were crushing and liberating at the same time. The favoritism I'd gaslit myself into questioning was not only real, it was so obvious that teenage friends had noticed it a decade ago. I'd spent years thinking I was being oversensitive, when in reality I'd been dramatically underreacting to consistent emotional neglect. Meanwhile, the consequences for my parents were escalating beyond what any of us had anticipated. Dad's company had scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss the disconnect between his public image and private behavior. While they weren't planning to fire him, his promotion to the regional position was being reconsidered. His supervisor had explained that leadership roles required trust, and employees were questioning whether someone who could abandon his daughter could be trusted to support his team members' work-life balance. Mom's volunteer organization had been more direct. They'd removed her from their upcoming campaign materials and asked her to step back from her spokesperson role until the situation was resolved. The director had explained in a carefully worded email that their organization's credibility depended on authentic representation, and recent developments had raised questions about alignment with their values. But the real bomb dropped when I received a call from Emma that afternoon. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first, but gradually the story came together. She and our parents had attempted to salvage their vacation by moving to a different part of the boat and avoiding social media, but the crew members had recognized them from my viral post. "Sarah, it's been horrible." The yacht staff kept giving us these looks, and I overheard two of them talking about the family who abandoned their daughter. Mom hasn't stopped crying since yesterday, and Dad is furious, but trying to pretend everything's normal. We're surrounded by all this beauty, but everyone's miserable. She paused to collect herself, then continued with something that stunned me. "But the worst part is that I keep thinking about everything you wrote in your letter, and I'm realizing how much I don't actually know how to do anything myself. I've been so used to Mom and Dad fixing everything for me that I've never learned to handle real problems. When the yacht crew started judging us, I had no idea how to cope with people disapproving of me. I've never experienced that before. This was a revelation I hadn't expected." Emma's constant need for support hadn't just been enabled by our parents, it had been required for her to function. She'd never developed the resilience that comes from facing disapproval or disappointment, because our parents had always rushed in to shield her from negative consequences. "I think I want to come home early, not because of the family drama, but because this trip is showing me that I don't actually know who I am without Mom and Dad constantly supporting everything I do. I've never been on a vacation where I had to handle any problems myself, and it's terrifying." She admitted that she'd never actually wanted to learn sailing. She'd just enjoyed the attention that came with her parents' enthusiasm for her new hobby. The expensive lessons, the gear, the vacation, none of it had been about genuine passion for sailing. It had been about maintaining her role as the daughter who got celebrated for everything. "Sarah, I know this sounds crazy, but I think I need to learn how to be more like you. You've been handling your own problems, making your own decisions, celebrating your own achievements for years. I don't even know how to be happy about something unless Mom and Dad are telling me how amazing I am for doing it. This conversation shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family dynamic. I'd always seen Emma as the winner in our parents' favoritism game, but she'd actually been trapped in a different kind of prison. While I'd been forced to develop independence and resilience through neglect, she'd been prevented from developing these crucial life skills through overprotection. The irony was stunning. My parents' favoritism had accidentally prepared me for success while sabotaging Emma's ability to function independently. Their neglect had taught me to be self-sufficient, while their coddling had left Emma emotionally dependent and fragile. As our conversation continued, Emma made a decision that surprised both of us. I'm going to ask Mom and Dad to cut the trip short and come home today. Not because of the drama, but because I need to start learning how to live my own life instead of just being their perfect little project. When I hung up with Emma, I felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to my family: genuine hope for change. Not the false hope based on empty promises, but real hope based on Emma's apparent willingness to examine her own role in our dysfunctional dynamic. That evening, I received a text from Dad: "We're flying home tomorrow. Emma insists. We need to have a family meeting when we get back." For the first time in my life, it seemed like my parents were being forced to confront the consequences of their choices instead of simply expecting me to absorb the pain in silence. The scared little girl inside me wanted to prepare for another round of gaslighting and blame-shifting, but the woman I'd become was ready for whatever came next. 3 days later, we sat around my parents' dining room table. The same table where countless family discussions had centered around Emma's needs while mine were dismissed as less important. But this time felt different. Emma looked genuinely uncomfortable, fidgeting with her hands instead of holding court as usual. Mom's eyes were red from crying, and Dad's typical authoritative demeanor had been replaced by something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. The silence stretched for several minutes before Emma spoke first. "I've been thinking about everything since we got back, and I need to say something. Sarah, I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you acknowledgement of how selfish I've been for years." She took a shaky breath and continued: "I always knew I got more attention, more support, more everything. But I told myself it was because I needed it more, or because you were so successful you didn't need as much help. I never stopped to think that maybe you needed support too. Just different kinds of support." Mom tried to interject: "Emma, honey, you don't need to dash." "Yes, I do need to," Emma said firmly, cutting her off. "Mom, Dad, I love you both, but what you did to Sarah was wrong. Not just the birthday trip, but years of treating her like she didn't matter as much as me. I've been complicit in it because it benefited me, but I can't pretend anymore that it was okay." This was not the Emma I'd grown up with. The woman sitting across from me was taking responsibility for her actions instead of deflecting blame or playing the victim. The spoiled little sister who'd never faced consequences was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely committed to change. Dad cleared his throat and spoke in a voice I'd never heard him use before, humble and uncertain. "Sarah, I want you to know that your social media post and the responses from our family and community have forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my parenting. I always thought I was being a good father by supporting Emma's dreams and celebrating your independence. I realize now that what I called supporting dreams was actually enabling dependency, and what I called celebrating independence was actually neglect." He paused, struggling with words. "Your grandmother called me yesterday and told me some things I didn't want to hear. She said I'd failed both of my daughters, Emma by not teaching her to be self-sufficient, and you by not showing you that your achievements mattered to me." Mom was crying again, but this time it seemed less about her own pain and more about genuine remorse. "Sarah, I need you to know that when I saw all those comments from family members saying they'd noticed the favoritism for years, I felt sick. I thought I was being a good mother by being Emma's emotional support system, but I was actually teaching her that she couldn't handle life without constant assistance. And I was teaching you that your feelings didn't matter as much as hers." She reached across the table toward me, then stopped herself. "I know we can't undo years of damage with one conversation. but I want to try to be the mother you deserved all along, if you'll let me." The apologies felt genuine, but I needed more than words. "I appreciate what you're all saying, but I need to see consistent changes in behavior, not just acknowledgement of past mistakes. Emma, I need you to understand that you can't keep falling back into crisis mode whenever life gets difficult, expecting everyone to drop everything to support you. Mom and Dad, I need you to start treating your daughters equally, not just in big moments, but in everyday interactions." Emma nodded immediately. "I've already started. I called the community college yesterday and enrolled in some business classes. Not because I necessarily want a business career, but because I need to learn how to set goals and achieve them without constant hand-holding. I also opened my own bank account and asked Mom and Dad to stop giving me money for everything." This was more progress than I'd seen from Emma in her entire adult life. But the real test came when Dad spoke next. "Sarah, I want to make some concrete changes too. First, I'm planning a proper celebration for your birthday, not to make up for this one, but because your achievements deserve to be celebrated. Second, I want to start having regular one-on-one time with you, like I should have been doing all along. And third, I'm going to be more mindful of how I talk about both of you to other people." I realize I've been bragging about Emma's adventures while treating your actual accomplishments as afterthoughts. Mom added, "I've already stepped down from my spokesperson role at the volunteer organization. They were right to question my authenticity. I can't advocate for supporting young women while failing to support my own daughter. I want to focus on being a better mother before I try to help other families." These weren't the hollow promises I'd heard before. These were specific, measurable commitments with built-in accountability. But I still needed them to understand the full scope of what their favoritism had cost. "I need you all to understand that this isn't just about missed birthdays or unequal treatment. Your favoritism taught me that I had to earn love through achievements, while teaching Emma that she deserved love regardless of effort. It damaged both of us in different ways, and it's going to take time to undo that damage." Over the following months, something remarkable happened. They actually followed through. Dad started planning monthly father-daughter outings with just me, where we talked about my work, my goals, and my interests without any mention of Emma. Mom began asking about my life with genuine curiosity instead of perfunctory politeness. And Emma continued working on herself, building independence and resilience she'd never been allowed to develop. The most surprising change was in our extended family relationships. Once the truth about our family dynamics was out in the open, relatives began treating me differently, with more attention, more inclusion, more genuine interest in my life. It was as if my social media post had given them permission to acknowledge what they'd always seen but felt unable to address. 6 months later, Emma called me with news that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. She'd gotten her first full-time job and was moving into her own apartment without any financial help from our parents. "Sarah, I know this sounds weird, but thank you for calling out our family's dysfunction. I never would have learned to stand on my own if you hadn't forced all of us to face the truth. My parents' marriage even seemed stronger after they stopped pouring all their energy into managing Emma's constant crises. They began pursuing their own interests and rekindling their relationship with each other instead of defining themselves entirely through their role as Emma's support system. The woman who'd sat alone on her birthday with a grocery store cake was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth and demanded to be treated accordingly. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your family is refusing to accept dysfunction as normal." As I finish telling you this story, I'm curious about your own experiences with family dynamics. Have you ever felt like the forgotten child in your own family? Have you had to confront favoritism or set boundaries with relatives who took you for granted? Sometimes standing up for yourself is the only way things will change, even when it feels like you're tearing everything apart. The truth is, families that fall apart when someone tells the truth were never as strong as they appeared. Real family bonds can survive honest conversations about hurt and disappointment. But relationships built on pretense and unequal treatment? Those were always going to crumble eventually. If this story resonates with you, Let me know in the comments what family dynamics you've had to navigate. Your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar situations. And if you found value in hearing how I finally stood up for myself after years of accepting scraps, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice in difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my journey from forgotten daughter to valued family member. Remember, you teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Take care of yourselves out there, and remember that your feelings and experiences matter just as much as everyone else's.